What's up, you guys? I'll tell you what, guys. It is good to be back out in the wild, and this adventure is going to be a special one. We are in the wild state of Alaska. This state isn't like most states in the US. This one is just a little bit more wild. And I'll tell you why. The mosquitoes here are the size of birds, as you can probably see, as they are pursuing my sweet, sweet blood right now. The common deer species that you see around here is the moose, and those guys are gigantic. It is going to be incredible. This state is the wild last frontier, and boy, it is wild. I can't wait to show you guys what all we have in store, because it is going to be quite the adventure. So what do you say we cut the chat and get to some adventuring? Alrighty guys, check out all this beaver activity. That's crazy. You can see all the chew marks along the bark here. You can see how they file it down to a point until the trunk disconnects from the rest of itself and topples over, just like that. Pretty wild. If you didn't know, beavers are like any rodent, and their teeth continually grow, so they like to keep them doled down by chewing on a whole lot of tree bark. Alright, you guys, poo-poo alert. If you don't like poo-poo, look away now. This is a carnivore, and we're thinking it's probably a wolf because you can see the little hairs inside, or the little pieces of fur, and then even some bones. It looks like almost a claw of some little mammal that it had consumed. So, always got to keep an eye out for the predators when you're out here walking, because you don't want to become part of that poo-poo. So, let's keep on moving and keep our eyes open. Now that right there is evidence of moose. My goodness, you guys. That's like a whole tub of chocolate covered almonds right there. Look at the inside, you can see that they're eating vegetation or being attacked by Alaska's state bird, the mosquito. My goodness, these things are gigantic. But there's a big pile of moose scat. Here's a big pile of moose scat, so we gotta keep an eye out. There's a whole lot of these little broken branches up here, and apparently that's from bears. Bears wanting the tippy tops of the little buds growing out. So they're going ahead and just snapping off tree branches like that. Pretty cool what you can find when you stop and take a look. It's like being a nature detective. Just gotta not get eaten by mosquitoes. Alright guys, walking through this little washed out area, seeing lots of evidence of moose, seeing tracks and droppings, and I think if I had a giant rack of antlers on my head, I'd want to walk somewhere where there weren't trees every 2 square feet also, because that's got to get annoying. I guess I can personally relate, because every time I'm walking through the forest, I tend to get my hair snagged on trees, and that's not too fun either. But anyways, I'm in this little washed out area, as I was saying, full of rocks and sand and all sorts of cool little deposits. And you see these periodically in between where the mountains come to a point. These little canyons tend to funnel snow melt and run it all the way down through here, and it seems to be able to generate quite a bit of power with the size of debris that's getting stuck up here on this little sandbar here, and these rocks getting tumbled around. But right now the extent of the snow melt is just this little creek over here. And you gotta imagine, with Alaska's sunlight being about 24 hours now, that it probably accelerates the snow melt process a little bit, in addition to the weather warming up and everything. But it's definitely an interesting little area for sure. But I'm gonna keep on moving. Here is even more evidence of moose. As you can see, there's some bark missing from that tree. And if we take some closer looks, we can actually see little grooves in the tree. It looks like something started scraping right here and went all the way up. And we're led to believe that this is moose because there's moose fur. Stuck in the tree sap, you can find all sorts of little moose hairs. But anyways, it seems like some moose was coming here to get a snack and left some of his dew stuck up here in the tree. And these hairs are very coarse. You can feel them, and they're actually hollow on the inside because they've got a little bit of air, and air is a great insulator, and that's pretty handy for an animal that lives in a place like Alaska where it gets very, very cold. A little bit of insulation. Now, hopefully, we can see one. Man, you guys, it is beautiful out here. You can see behind me there's some trees tipping over the trail. I'm guessing with the crazy weather they get here during the winters, that tends to knock over some of the older, more fragile ones. But man, just listen to the ambiance, the birds tweeting away and everything. And there's lots of these spiky plants here. And these guys are actually called Devil's Club, and you can imagine where they got the name just by looking at them. I mean, look at those thorns. They got these weird little buds coming out the tips. There's also lots of red berries. It's not the same type of plant, but you can just imagine a little cardinal coming sitting on that branch. It's like a picturesque painting that you'd see in some elderly person's home. You see the mountains poking out behind me now. There's supposed to be some water up ahead, so hopefully we can see some animals. Now, with it being springtime here in Alaska and the snow's starting to melt, you can see there's still some snow sitting around, but it looks kind of dead for the most part, looking at all these dried sticks and leaves and everything. But if you take a closer look, you can actually see lots of new life popping up. Here we have what is known in the wild edible community as fiddleheads, and these are baby ferns. They will pop out of the ground and go ahead and unfurl and have all these sprawling leaves popping out. But yeah, as I said, these guys are actually edible. You can pickle them, and they're a nice little snack, and hopefully these guys can make it to adulthood. Otherwise, some little animal will come along and pick them off. But behind me, we can see a common sight here with all these birch trees. This is a gall, and on the trunk it is also known as a burl. And what these guys are is an insect has come along and laid its eggs inside of the tree trunk, and the tree goes ahead and grows a whole bunch of wood around it and creates this little encasement for the insect that the insect is then going to live inside of and kind of consume some of the nutrients and eventually burrow out when it's ready to complete its metamorphosis process and then fly away. But yeah, there's probably some little larvae in there because I'm not seeing an exit hole. But these guys can actually get really, really big as the tree continues to grow. It's kind of like a cancerous growth, and you'll just have this massive ball of wood. And here in Alaska, I see it's used quite often in architecture. All right, you guys, I'm walking alongside one of the lakes in Alaska, one of the many lakes. This state has a whole ton of water. But man, it is some crystal clear water at that. Very beautiful, super cold. I put my hands in to try and film a bit of underwater action, and boy, that's some chilly stuff. Won't want to jump into there. I got an itching to go fishing, you guys. I've got a bit of a predicament though. As you guys can see, there's still ice on the lake. As the water is not moving too much, there's just a whole bunch of ice still on the lake. So I'm gonna have to keep an eye out for a little bit of an opening, and hopefully with this crystal clear water, I can see any potential catches. Now you guys, one cool thing about this little lake, well, I should say big lake, is that it was actually carved out by a glacier. Now Alaska's got a number of glaciers still active. Most of them are up there on the mountains. But at one point, a glacier came through here and just carved out this massive lake, and it actually goes down to about 166 feet deep. That is quite the lake, if you ask me. There's supposed to be lake trout in here, which I caught lake trout when I was up in Montana and Wyoming area, and it's a very cool fish, very fun to catch. But unfortunately, those guys tend to hang out pretty deep, so I don't know if I'll be catching any of those guys today. Now, those are some worms. There's a few nice sized night crawlers under this log. Alrighty guys, so I'm gonna go ahead and try a little bit of fishing, if I can get you to balance there. You may have noticed I've got my fishing rod tucked in here, like I'm a sketchy salesman on the street. 20 feet of clearance between me and the ice, so hopefully I can cast into that area and catch a fish. So with these travel fishing rods, they're pretty handy because they just tuck into themselves. But I do notice that they tend to be a little bit more fragile. Every time I use one of them, I end up breaking the tip off the rod by the end of the trip. Alrighty guys, and we are just going to be going the old-fashioned route of worm and hook. I tried to pack light on this trip, and light I did pack. Gotta keep an eye out for bears and mooses because you don't want to get too close to those guys. Team park signs recommend staying at least 75 feet away from a moose and at least 900 feet away from a bear. So hopefully I can do that. Alrighty guys, we found some open water. And you can see over here it's actually feeding into a river. So that might be an option. I know a lot of the time cold water fish like to sit in currents and wait for stuff to drift down into their mouths because it's a whole lot easier. Just wait for the food to come down like it's on a conveyor belt. But we'll go ahead and try our luck casting around in this kind of area. Hopefully no bears creep up on us. Alright guys, so most of my weights aren't doing the trick because I was packing so light. So I found this little rock that's fairly soft, and I found a rock that's fairly hard. And I'm just etching a little trail along the side, as you can see, going all the way around. So I should be able to tie a loop, a fishing line, and knot it around and have a little bit of a weight. And if it falls off, it's natural, so it's not like the lead is going to affect the water. You know, you guys, one crazy thing about where Alaska is actually positioned on the globe is that during certain times of the year, like right now during the summer, Alaska gets a whole lot of daylight. In fact, certain parts of Alaska even get 24 hours of sunlight during certain parts of the year into the summer. And that means that during parts of the winter, they're gonna get 24 hours of darkness. And that's a good time to see the aurora borealis. Right now, it's kind of a impossible feat to accomplish because, as you can see, the sun is still in the sky, and it is currently 8 p.m. And with that, you get a whole lot of hiking in. It's nice to not have to worry about the sun going down and having to worry about it getting dark while you're out 5 miles in on a trail, but it sure does mess with your sleep schedule if you're not able to get some total darkness, you know, closing those blackout blinds and everything. But it's a handy little thing. You can see the sun kind of goes down at a very wide angle, and from our perspective it almost just bounces off the horizon, then goes right back up and just kind of circles around you, going around and around and around. And the sunsets are really, really slow, and at a certain point the sun doesn't set at all, unless you're over by the mountains, because you can kind of see it dip below the mountains and you get a little bit of darkness, but not too much. Kind of like a blue at night rather than super dark, because the sun is just below the surface. Alright guys, there's one of those big bulbous burls that I was talking about. That one has gotten to quite an immense size, much larger than my head. Some would argue that is not true, but I mean physically it's much larger than my head. Alright, so they typically say that rabbit's feet are good luck, but what about if you find a severed rabbit's foot in the middle of the woods? Is that good luck, or does that mean I should be on edge? Look at that, you guys. So that is the foot of a snowshoe hare. Now, I saw a snowshoe hare earlier in the trip, an entire snowshoe hare. It wasn't missing any of its feet, from what I could see, but that is just the foot. That rabbit is either out there missing a foot, or he's inside of some sort of predator's body. Check out this little area. So as you can see, the river is starting to cut through this little area of snow. I'm not sure if it's completely frozen over or not during the winter. I'd assume so with the types of winters that Alaska gets. But yeah, all this snow melt is now cutting little paths through, and you definitely want to be careful because you can see these little shelves right here. You don't want to go walking on those shelves because if they come up from under you, you're going in the water. It's not super deep, but boy, it would be super cold. Look at that spider. Must be a special species of snow-dwelling spider out here in the cold. Goodness, my toes would be freezing up. Look at that, that's pretty cool. Alright you guys, I'm currently inside of the Fortress of Solitude. Yeah, it's a nice little place. Luckily the ice above me is pretty thin, so if it were to fall on my head, it wouldn't be detrimental. I'm guessing water was coming through here at one point in order to hollow this out, but now it seems pretty dry. Luckily my whole get up is waterproof, so I don't have to worry about that. But now the trick is getting back out. Just like birth. Alright you guys, so we're making it farther south in Alaska, getting closer to the coastline, and it was just raining a bit, but now it's kind of stopped. But this area reminds me a lot of being in the Pacific Northwest, where it's actually a rainforest, and it results in a whole lot of greenery. You can see all the mosses and everything, and these giant towering trees. Look at that, these evergreens. But we should be getting close. Alright guys, well I'm hiking along and I'm starting to notice a bit of a fault with my fishing rod carrying method, you could say. So every time I bend over, you know, looking at something, it seems to get a bit excited and extend on its own. But anyways, you guys, what I wanted to show you is this right here. Now, upon first glance, you'd think that that's spray paint or something on a stick, but the weird thing is that it's going right through the center. And this coloration on this rotten piece of wood is actually a result of green stain fungi, which has colonized the wood, a rotten piece of wood already dead, and it's coming through and consuming it and decomposing it, and it results in a beautiful color right there. It almost seems artificial against the backdrop, but yeah, cool little sight. And if it didn't know better, it would have thought it was just artificial paint, man-made. But yeah, pretty cool. Alrighty guys, so one thing I would like to talk about real quick is look at these trees and look at all the cones on the tippy top. Now, the spruce trees that they have around here produce a whole lot of cones, so much so that they are able to practically make up the entirety of the diet for the red squirrels and still continue to make baby trees like this. But you can see up there, it's just thick and they'll fall down. You'll see little piles of deconstructed cones. So the squirrels are able to get to the seed, you know, at the tips of the cones. But in other words, we have made it to the sea. So right now we are on a little beach, and it's sort of an inlet because the way that Alaska is set up is kind of cool. How there's a whole lot of mountains, and then the water was able to weave its way in between. Because man, where else do you see so many mountains right on the coast? That is pretty wild. But they've got black sandy beaches here. And you can see all the little new growths starting to pop up. All these little seashore plants. But yeah, let's go ahead and walk around on the beach and see if we can't find anything interesting. Hello, gulls. Guess the gulls don't like me. They flew away. I'm gonna go ahead and try and throw out a line here just for funsies. Should have done that trick, now it's stuck. Alright guys, I made another weight out of a rock, and hopefully that'll do the trick. Go ahead and cast out. Whoa. Alrighty guys, while I was doing those super sick tricks over there, a bald eagle landed over here on the beach. So I'm going to try and creep my way up and use the zoom lens to see if we can't get a better shot of him. Alrighty guys, there's a black bear over there. He's just up, grazing around, browsing on the little plants there on the shore. But black bears tend to be a little less aggressive than grizzly bears. That doesn't mean I'm gonna go up to him, but it's actually about the same size as that grizzly bear we saw, because that grizzly was quite small. But you can see this guy doesn't have quite the hump on its back that the grizzly did, which is a good indicator that it's a grizzly if it's got that big hump over by its shoulders. It's an interesting little creature with a beautiful backdrop here. So it is currently 10 o'clock at night. You wouldn't believe it just by looking, but that's one of the perks of adventuring in Alaska during the summer. And we had just seen what looked to be sea lions swimming around out there in the water, popping their heads out. But yeah, it is amazing how light it is, even though it's 10 o'clock at night. Pretty cool. Alrighty guys, so a lot of people, when they think of Alaska, they think of gold, and that is because in the late 1800s, the Klondike Gold Rush actually contributed to a lot of growth in this area. About 100,000 or so people came to this area with word of gold being in the streams and in the mountains, and people came with hopes of getting rich. And what's happening is that glacial activity and various forms of weathering will break up rock way up there in the mountains, and then the water, as snow melts, these rivers will pick up that gold and bring it downstream. And because this gold is so heavy, it tends to sink down into these streams, into the sediment. And if you've ever seen a gold nugget, that's a piece of gold that's been rolled around in the stream, similar to how rocks are polished, kind of polish that piece of gold. But one way to tell if there is gold in the area is to pan for it. So people will come down to the stream side and dig up some of the sediment, pan it, and if they find little pieces of gold, that means that they're on the right track, and they'll just follow the trail until they find, hopefully, nuggets. But what I'm going to be doing today is trying my hand at a little bit of panning. Now, I'm not much of an expert, but what I do know is that gold is heavy. So we'll look for some big rocks and maybe dig up some sediment on the side where the water is coming and pushing gold into those little cracks. Like say, if this was a giant boulder here and the water's coming here, the gold is so heavy that it would roll along and then get tucked down into this rock. So that's the idea. We'll try out my theory and see if it works, and if not, we'll just enjoy this beautiful scenery. For gold panning, you're gonna want the finer sediment. It'd be easier if I had a shovel, but unfortunately I do not. That little rock up there almost looks like it has gold in it. Huh. Interesting. But yeah, we'll just go ahead and load up the sediment. And usually you would use some sort of sifter to classify the different sizes of rocks, but I do not have a classifier, so we're just gonna make do with what we got. And the ideal situation would be getting down to actual bedrock, because then the gold can't go any deeper. Because the longer the gold sits here, the deeper it's gonna work its way into the sediment. Alrighty guys, so here's how this works. We're going to go ahead and find a little offshoot of the stream with some calm water, like right here. I'll just shake it around, get the real fine sediment off, and boy, is that cold on the fingers. Ooh. And the goal, typically with gold panning, is to get the gold to the bottom of the pan, and that is done by a whole lot of shaking. I'm gonna go ahead and pull out the larger stones, like these guys. And now I've got the pan kind of at an angle in order to, one, try and keep my fingers out of the water, and two, focus the gold to land into this little corner here. And we're just gonna kind of let the water take the lighter pieces of sediment off. And I'm shaking the pan around like this. I don't know if you've ever gone to the beach and stood in the wet sand where the water's kind of washing up and then receding, and moved your feet really fast. You're able to sink down because it's almost as if the sediment has liquefied, and that's what this is kind of doing, is suspending sediment in the water and allowing the heavier pieces to drop to the bottom. It kind of works out that I'm so cold because the shivering does the work for me. All right, now at this stage I might even be able to separate it off. So we're just gonna swish the water around and try and get the heavier stuff to stick up there at the top, whereas the lighter stuff will come down. And a lot of the time when you're doing this, you'll hit a layer of black sand, and that's actually iron. And because iron's so heavy like gold, it tends to stay in one spot. Try that again. Alrighty guys, it might be very hard to see, but there does look like there's one teeny tiny speck of yellow right there at the top. I'll get out my macro camera and see if it doesn't look more like gold, but it's not gonna make you rich by any means, but it's definitely fun to be able to find something like that. Alright you guys, I thought I'd give you a little tour of the base camp. You know, with the amount of bears and moose and whatnot that are in Alaska, our base camp looks a little different than usual this time. It's not just a bear tent. Bear tent. Has nothing to do with bears, I was just talking about a plain old tent. But anyways, I thought I would show you a little bit around our base camp. So, voila! Oh, wrong one. Voila! So, we are staying in this little cabin here. Not this little cabin here. That would be quite a stinky sleep. And I'll give you a walk around the premises because it is quite an interesting backyard. We have a very nice green carpet. It is very squishy, good for old person joints like my own. I've got some bulbous sneeze. Now here is an interesting little area, very unique on this property. There seems to be an infestation of evil ground squirrels. You can tell by the amount of spruce seeds sitting here on the ground and the amount of holes from these evil squirrels. And you ask me, Alec, why do you think these squirrels are evil? Well, I'll tell you. Over here is the old cabin that has since been abandoned because, you guessed it, the squirrels ate the people. Keep in mind that is only a theory that I came up with within the past 5 minutes, so that may not be entirely true, but boy, are there a lot of mosquitoes over here. The mosquitoes in Alaska are not like normal mosquitoes. These mosquitoes are gigantic. Now, one thing about them being gigantic is that it is much easier to snatch them out of the air and crush their bones. Mosquitoes don't actually have bones, they have an exoskeleton, but you get the point. They are here to take my blood, and I want my blood because I use it every day. So what I've done is released my beautiful locks, and I'll use them like a horsetail and whip the mosquitoes out of the sky. Now, this may very well be another victim of the evil ground squirrels. This is another rabbit's foot, and unlike the last one, this one still has a bit of leg bone attached. But these are from the snowshoe rabbits, and the snowshoe that humans use is actually kind of inspired by the snowshoe rabbits because there is so much surface area with this thick fur here on the bottom that the rabbit is able to stay atop light fluffy snow because it disperses its weight and it's not as likely to sink. And additionally, the fur on the bottom of the foot is so thick that it is able to insulate the body heat and keep the body heat from contacting the snow, which would result in the snow freezing, or the snow is already frozen. It would result in the snow melting, and then the rabbit gets wet feet, and that could then in turn freeze the rabbit to the ground, and rabbits don't like to be frozen to the ground. That's, if I know one thing about rabbits, that they don't like to be frozen to the ground. But anyways, moving on before we get eaten alive by evil ground squirrels, there is much more to this property to explore. Now over here we have the resident neighbors of the evil ground squirrels. This is on the opposite side of camp, so we are surrounded. There is no escaping these guys if they choose to revolt. Now behind me we have a fuel source for heating the cabin. As it is such a remote cabin out here in the middle of Alaska, the cabin is actually heated by a wood burning stove. And you can see the chimney way up there that releases the smoke. And yeah, there's no running water, there's no electricity, no heat, no anything. But look at that view. Doesn't it make up for it? you guys, I think I can say without a doubt that this has been a pretty wild adventure. I've been able to see a whole lot of animals that I've never seen in the wild before, which has been really cool. And yeah, overall, experiencing wild Alaska has been a pretty wild experience. Not to overuse the word wild, but I think it encompasses this adventure pretty well. It has been pretty darn wild. And one amazing thing that I've noticed is just how natural the state is. It is incredible to be driving across this massive state, which is around twice the size of my own state of Texas, and yet it seems like you are always in a national park. You know, there's scenic outlooks all over the place. There's pull-offs to little hiking trails and tons of fishing ponds and all sorts of amazing views across the entire state. And it is very well maintained. It is impressive how they manage to appreciate nature so much that they're going to go to these great lengths to ensure that it is protected. And even the local Alaskans, I'll see them out there picking up trash on a weekend just to preserve what they have, because they know how amazing it is to have something like this in this day and age, in the day of urbanization, and yet they have this pristine, beautiful wilderness, and they want to hold on to that, which I think is a very respectable attitude. And I really appreciate all the work that they've put in to maintain this beautiful wild state, for sure. You may know that Alaska is known as the last frontier. It's on the license plate. It's kind of their state motto, is Alaska is the last frontier. And one thing that I've kind of learned from Alaska is that maybe not all frontiers need to be conquered. You know, humans tend to find a frontier and it's time to push forward into it and settle and urbanize and turn it into human habitat. It's possible to live alongside nature. You know, you pop a little cabin down in the middle of the woods and learn to live off the land. Use your own minimal amount of resources. You just kind of enjoy life out here in the wilderness. You'll have to excuse the noise of the bush plane going over. It seems like everyone here in Alaska has bush planes. It's pretty impressive. I would guess that a fair amount of the population of Alaska has their pilot's license. But it's almost a necessity with the very, very few number of major roads here in Alaska, which is pretty impressive. They've managed to leave a lot of wilderness to the animals. The amazing thing about Alaska being the last frontier is that if the current theory on how humans made it to North America still stands, Alaska was the very first place in North America to have humans step foot. What would become Alaska was attached to what would become Asia. There was a stretch of ice, an ice bridge, you could say, connecting the two continents. And supposedly humans crossed on over and then made it southwards. And so Alaska was the first place to have humans step foot in North America. And yet today it seems like it's still one of the wildest, untouched places in North America. And despite humans showing up, it has managed to remain a wild place, which I think is almost poetic. It's a testament to how humans are able to live alongside nature. To an extent, we have left Alaska pretty darn wild. But you guys, on that note, all good things have to come to an end. It is time for me to make my way back south, if I can get up out of this moss, and make my way on back to Texas. So you guys, thanks for coming with me, and until next time, stay wild!